Hey, what's up, guys? Let's talk about factoring trinomials using the clown method. Okay, here we go. 2n squared plus 5n minus 3. All right, so first thing you always look for is the greatest common factor. Biggest number, all three numbers can be divided by. Always start with that. Okay, so I'm looking at 2, 5, and 3. The biggest number, all three of them can be divided by is 1. Sweet. I love it when it's 1 because I move straight into the next part. All right, so for the clown method, we're going to set up our factors and we kind of tell ourselves where everything belongs. So we know that these two numbers have to multiply to 2n squared. We know that these two numbers have to multiply to negative 3. And then we're going to like, hey, these inner ones, we know that they multiply and together they have to add to positive 5n. Okay, so our goal is to figure out what goes where. If you use the product sum, this will actually help you with some reasoning here, right? So we do 2 times negative 3, it's negative 6. And then we have 5 is the sum. So two numbers that multiply to negative 6 but add to 5. So the negative 6, that means one is negative, one is positive. Okay, and so I'm like, oh, hey, what if it's negative 1 and 6? Because negative 1 times 6 equals negative 6, and negative 1 plus 6 equals 5. So this works. We're going to go with those. All right, so here's what this tells me. This tells me with my clown method, as we're reverse thinking when we multiplied it, we're reverse thinking that process, right? So I would have negative 1n when I multiply these two things together, and I end up with 6n when I multiply these two outside numbers together. So now we use some reasoning here to figure out what goes where. Well, I know that these two right here have to multiply together to equal negative 3. Okay, so if I put the 3 here, 3 times something would have to equal negative 1n. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work. So what if I put the 3 over here and the 1 here? Well, 1 times something can equal negative 1n, and 3 times something can equal 6n. So whoo-hoo, I think that's it. Remember the signs, top goes with the left, bottom goes with the right. Okay, and then I just ask myself, well, negative 1 times what equals negative 1n? Well, negative 1 times n equals negative 1n. And then I say 3 times what is 6n? 3 times 2n is 6n. 2n times n will be that 2n squared. Everything works out. So my factors are 2n minus 1 times n plus 3. Okay, so a little bit of reasoning goes on. If you use the product sum, it kind of helps you figure out a little bit easier what numbers you need to use. Let's try it again. 5x squared minus 14x plus 8. The first thing we do, greatest common factor. Biggest number, 5, 14, and 8 can be divided by is 1. Sweet. All right, let's start setting things up. Okay, so I have my two factors. I know the first two numbers have to multiply to 5x squared. These back two numbers have to multiply to positive 8. And then we create that middle term by multiplying the insides and the outsides. And together those have to add to negative 14x. Okay, so let's see what that combination would be. Let's do our product sum. So 5 times 8 is 40. The middle term with the sign, negative 14. You could use Desmos, start dividing 40 divided by what, and see which of those pairs multiplies, adds to negative 14. Eventually, you're going to find out that it's negative 4 and negative 10. Okay, this is the middle term. Okay, this is that negative 14x, right? Because negative 4x plus negative 10x is negative 14x. So we're going to write this in here, negative 4x, negative 10x. It doesn't matter which order you write those in. We just know those go in the middle because they add to negative 14x. All right, so at this point, we go and we can look at the 8, or we could start with the 5, 5x squared, whichever one you want to do. Okay, if I look at the 8, if I tried 8, I'm like, if I put 8 here, well, it times 1/2, but I don't want a half there. If I put the 8 here, 8 times something has to equal negative 10x. I'm like, no, that's not going to work for me. All right, so what if I do, so we're not going to use 8 times 1, but this is also 2 times 4. Okay, so I can try 2 and 4. If I put 2 and 4 here, 2 times negative 2x would work, but I don't want that because 4 times something has to equal negative 10. I'm like, that's not the order that I want, so let's swap the order. 4 times something can equal negative 4x. 2 times something can equal negative 10x. Sweet. Okay, so it's a little bit of like puzzle solving, what's going to fit correctly. And now we finish it. Negative 4 times x is negative 4x. 2 times 5x gets me to negative 10x. And then just check 5x times x. Does that equal 5x squared? It sure does. There's my factors. Okay, so a little bit of reasoning, a little bit of like what's going to work, got to know your multiplication, see kind of the big picture with it. All right, let's try it again. 6m squared plus 10m minus 4. First thing that we're going to look for is that greatest common factor. Biggest number, all of them can be divided by. 6, 10, and 4 can all be divided by 2. So I'm going to have to deal with that first. Let's pull the factor out. And then what's left is how do I multiply back to 6m squared plus 10m minus 4? Okay, everything should change. So 2 times 3 is 6 times m squared gets me 6m squared. 2 times positive 5 is 10 times m, so I get 10m. And then 2 times negative 2 equals negative 4. Okay, so think about your multiplication. We're just working reverse. This 2's only job now is to stay out front. Don't let him do anything else. All right, here we go. Don't lose it. It just has to be the guardian out front. Let's set up our clown. Okay, so we're using the inside parts here. So 3m squared has to be multiplied with those. Negative 2 has to come from the outside pieces. And now inside and the outside, those have to create 5m. All right, so let's see what we would use. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. Middle term is positive 5. Okay, so if this is negative, that means 1 is negative, 1 is positive. And I have to add to 5, so this would have to be 6 and negative 1. Negative 1 times 6 is negative 6. Negative 1 plus 6 is 5. Okay, this takes the place of that middle term. This goes in here, negative 1m, positive 6m, because when you add those together, it equals 5m. Okay, now it's just figure it out. So we have negative 2 over here, so it's negative 2 times 1, or flip that order, right? So if I put negative 2 here, negative 2 times something would have to equal negative m. Okay, so I don't want that. So let's put the 2 over here and put the 1 here, okay? Negative 1 times something can equal negative m. 2 times something can equal 6m. All right, so negative 1 times m is negative m. Okay, 2 times 3m equals 6m. And there we go. So it's going to be 2 times 3m minus 1 times m. Oh, I didn't put my sign here. That's a positive plus 2. There's our factored form. Okay, so using that reasoning, seeing what works, do it one more time. Greatest common factor first, 4k squared minus 14k plus 10. The biggest number they can all be divided by, 4, 14, and 10 can all be divided by 2. Pull that out. Another way to think of what's inside is like if you divide all of these by 2, what's left, right? So 4k squared divided by 2 is 2k squared. Negative 14k divided by 2 is negative 7k. 10 divided by 2 is positive 5. Okay, that's another way to figure out what goes in your parentheses. It should multiply back to the original. All right, remember 2 stays out front. Do not lose that 2 or else you'll be wrong. All right, let's set up Now we have two factors together. These first numbers multiply to 2k squared. The last numbers multiply to 5. And then we create this middle term and figure out where it goes, what goes where. So let's do the product sum. 2 times 5 is 10. Negative 7 is the sum. Okay, two numbers that create a positive product but a negative sum. So these are going to have to both be negative. You can see like, okay, 10 times 1 equals 10, but 10 plus 1 equals 11, right? That's what you're looking for. So if I go negative 2 times negative 5, that equals positive 10, negative 2 plus negative 5. There's my negative 7. This works. That's what we're going to use. Okay, so negative 2k, negative 5k. These add to negative 7k. Sweet. Now let's go figure out. We have 5. Okay, so 5, it's either 5 times 1 or 1 times 5, right? So I could put the 5 here, but then I need 5 times something here. It has to equal negative 2k. And I'm like, that doesn't look right. So maybe if I put the 5 over here, 5 times something can equal negative 5k. Oh, okay, so let's try that. So there's that. Both our signs are negative because these middle terms have to be negative. All right, and then fill in the rest. Negative 1 times 2k gets me negative 2k. And then negative 5 times something has to equal negative 5k. Well, negative 5 times k equals negative 5k. So my final factored form is 2 times k minus 1 times 2k minus 5. That's the clown method, using some logic, some reasoning skills, kind of like a cool math puzzle.